Welcome again to Woman Enough for Marriage. My name is Wumi Ajayi. I will be continuing the series I started on default modes. And I just want to say that if you've missed the first two parts, this is the third part, please check them out on my YouTube channel. And as a reminder, a quick reminder, I said a default mode is a situation that exists unless someone or something does something to change it. So our default modes are like our automatic setting, the way that we will automatically react, respond, behave, and do things. The different default modes that we developed before we got into marriage can actually dictate how we respond to our spouses and how we do marriage generally. I've talked about the default mode of selfishness, how, we have a natural instinct to look after ourselves, to be self-centered, and how we need to make effort in marriage to be selfless. And I also looked at the default modes of the things that we learned from our parents and other adults in adult relationships, in married relationships while we were growing up, and how that forms our own idea of marriage, which we then take into our own married relationships. So today I'll be looking at the influence of culture and circumstances on how we develop some default modes of reacting, of behaving, of responding to our spouses in marriage. And when I'm talking about culture, let's take culture for a start. I'm not just talking about the culture of the society that we grow, that we develop in, or that we are living in. Of course, that goes a long way to determine how we react. For example, a society that sees the role of women as being in the kitchen and the role of the men as going out to bring in the bread. If you grow up in that culture and you've not unlearned that, nothing has changed that setting, that mindset in you, then you're likely to go into marriage with that same mindset and that default mode. And then we talk about the culture of the families that we grew up in, different families with different cultures. The things that are acceptable in one family might be unacceptable in another family. So some families, when it's birthdays, they make a big deal of each other's birthdays and they celebrate them and all that. And so if you grow up in such a family, the tendency is that when you think that's how everybody celebrates birthdays, and it might be a shocker for you, maybe when it's your birthday and your spouse is not making as much fuss as we're used to being made. And so there's different cultures that we pick up from the families that we grew up in. As part of the way the society dictates how we should behave in our marriages, there's also the aspect of our race and culture, the racial culture and beliefs that we grew up in. Some culture, for example, believes that when you marry, you don't just marry your spouse, you marry the family. So they believe that you marry the family, you are not married into the family. And people that grow up believing that culture, people that grow up in that culture are likely to have problems in their marriage if they have not unlearned, if they have not made effort to unlearn that and to put their feet down. Because when the family believes that you're married to them, it gives them the right to interfere in your marriage. And if you're not putting your foot down against it, then you're likely to be having conflict in your marriage because of, family interferences. And there's also the types of family that we grew up in and how that affects our default mode. Say somebody grew up in a liberal family where anything goes, people, they don't really care much. You can go out and come back late in the night. You can choose what you want to eat. You don't have to eat with the family. And, so much liberalism. If you then marry someone who grew up from a strict family, the chances are that your ideals will be clashing because the things that would be The ways of behaving that will be your default mode will be so different. Your ideals when it comes to bringing up your children will be clashing. Your ideal of how your family should be run will be different. So we need to create an awareness of how some of these things affect us. Again, somebody who maybe has come from a divorced home or a separated home, or someone who maybe their mom left when they were young, they're likely to struggle with trust issues. They're likely to have the fear that the people that love them will abandon them. And this will also be affecting how they relate with their spouse. So if we don't understand the things that determines our responses and our actions in our marriages, then we might just be, running around in circles and not knowing where the sources of our problems are coming from. So moving on to circumstances of our growing up. There are different circumstances that we all grew up in. For example, I grew up mainly with girls, and my husband grew up mainly with boys. And so by the time we got married, I can really say that I was experienced in how a man behaves, or the differences between a man and a woman. So it was almost like I was expecting him to behave like one of my sisters. And he as well wasn't as experienced in how a woman, in the psychology of a woman. And so some of the conflicts that we had earlier on in our marriage was because we weren't really experienced, we weren't really exposed to the psychology of each other. And we have people who maybe they're the only child. If you're an only child, the chances are that you received all the love and affection. You haven't really learned how to share and things like that. And so in marriage, you might struggle to share, and you might struggle to share your spouse's time and attention because you've just been used to getting all the attention. People who maybe you're the only boy, if you're the only boy amidst girls, maybe you're spoiled rotten because the girls did everything. Or maybe you're the only girl amidst boys, and then the boys are very protective of you. And then you go into marriage, you expect your spouse to be as protective of you as they were, you know. Or people that are firstborns, sometimes firstborns, because of this responsibility that comes with being the first child, you have to, mature, look after your younger ones and things. That some firstborns that end up, calling the shots in the family because they tell their junior ones what to do, and their parents accord them the honor as well as the first child. And so there's a chance, there's every chance that as the firstborn, if you're not aware of what your default mode was or is because of the position that you took in the family, in marriage, you might then expect that your spouse will be falling in line with whatever you decide. Whereas in marriage, no one can call the shots. Marriage is about compromise, marriage is about communication, marriage is about both of you, two people, not just one person calling the shot. I can go on and on and on. But the most important thing is that we are aware of our own particular circumstances, that might be affecting us in how we're relating with our spouses, that might be dictating our default modes of response, of action, of behavior. We can't choose the circumstances that we're born into, neither can we choose the family that we're born into. But what we can do, what we have control of, is how these circumstances are currently affecting our marriages, or are likely to affect our marriages in the future. And so if some of those circumstances and the default modes of behaving that we've developed as a result of them, or as a result of the family that we're born into, are affecting our marriages negatively or becoming sources of conflict, then the onus is on us to create awareness of those things and to make effort to change. It's important that spouses, we also know, because if my spouse is an only child, I know he's an only child. And so as the spouse of an only child, I have a responsibility towards them to first of all acknowledge that and acknowledge some of the default modes that they could have developed as a result of that. Because if I don't, then I will not be able to sympathize with them. If I'm the spouse of someone who was abandoned as a child and they're having trust issues, I should sympathize with that, first of all, because if I don't sympathize with them, I will not be able to support them to, to get over it or to change. And if I'm also the one, I also need to accept, I need to know, I need to acknowledge the fact that, right, the fact that I was abandoned as a child might be a reason why I'm struggling to trust my spouse. Because when you acknowledge that there is a problem, first of all, then you are likely to seek solution. It's about being aware of those the default modes that might be negative default modes that we have developed as a result of those circumstances, as a result of being born into the family that we've been born into, that might be affecting us, and to do something about them. Thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully in my next video, I will be concluding this series on default modes. Take care and God bless.